Y'all don't know how annoyed I am at the fact that I'm making this video again because I'm typically streaming my consciousness. I have notes, but I'm just going off the dome. And so I don't know if I'm gonna remember everything. But that said, let's get into it. I watched the whole interview. I do think you should too. It's a worthwhile watch. I think Tish did a good job because she didn't watch the show, so she didn't have any biases. So we had an opportunity to really just get to know these different layers of Olandria and had the space for that. I do want to start this video with what I'm calling the take it from Olandria tips. So she gives us two that I really liked. One thing that she says is she's able to see like all perspectives and consider all perspectives of a situation. I like this from her because we also see her setting boundaries though. A lot of people will say, well, I'm considering all things and so now I'm just enabling all the things, right? But she's not doing that. She's able to see the things, but she's also able to say, I don't necessarily fuck with you though. And so I want y'all to take that tip from her. The other thing that I really liked is that she talked about how Nick had to study her and how he needed to prove himself, right? She had a couple of preconceived notions, some hesitancies, and so he really had to show her that it wasn't what she thought it was. So y'all do not shut yourself off from opportunities that are new or different, but make sure that those opportunities are proving to you that they are worth the risk. Right now, y'all know that my undergraduate research is in the conceptualization of Black womanhood in relationship to Black manhood within the context of family dynamics and healthy romantic relationships. I've talked on this platform before about the armoring that happens with little Black girls to train them into their womanhood. And when we're watching this interview, we get to see both aspects of that present in things that Olandria is saying to us that I want to highlight for us. So if you don't know, the conceptualization of womanhood has been very different throughout the United States at different periods of time. There is a concept called true womanhood, but that is rooted in white supremacy and it was not meant for Black people or women of color at all. And so we really made our own. And what we did is we said, okay, well, our womanhood is going to have both respectability, which is that true womanhood aspect, but also strength. And that strength is about the self-sacrifice. It's about the prioritization of the family above yourself, right? And really just, again, all of this about trying to help you survive the world that we live in. That said, Olandria opens the interview talking about how she watched the first episode back and she heard her accent. Y'all probably know where I'm going. And she, I think, said ill. But either way, there are like 3 different times, if not 4, where she talks about not enjoying hearing herself. And she makes these sort of like derogatory remarks about her accent. And again, another reason why I feel like Tish was great for this interview, because she's really able to empower Olandria around like leaning into that and like, fuck what people think, right? But Olandria talks about when her mom came, she said, my mask slipped and that country bumpkin came out, right? And this is her in her relaxed state, right? And then she talks about how she thinks that people perceive Southerners with accents as less intelligent. And that just made me so goddamn sad. Because her not liking to hear her voice, her thinking that there's something wrong with being a country bumpkin or that people perceive people with accents as less educated is not a narrative that she wrote for her fucking self. That came from somewhere else. That was ascribed onto her as a Southern Black woman. And then she goes on to talk about how she really had to code switch a lot in the villa. And she talks about even her life in Houston, how she needs to be more polished. And this is when we hear the first entrance of that Black womanhood showing up, right? This is the respectability piece. This is the part that's saying this is how you show up as a woman. This is how you show up as a respectable woman in this world. But then she tells us how she felt down in the depths and drained by parts of her experience in the villa. And y'all, I think part of it is that. And I'm going to tell you why. All of us have some level of experience around having to be what I call on, okay? If you're a parent, you know. If you work a job, you know. If you go to school, you know. You just have to show up in certain type of ways in certain types of environments. But usually at the end of the day, we all get to come home and we get to go whew and sort of relax and let those walls down, right? She couldn't do that for weeks on end. She had to remain poised and put together and respectable in order to really be in her womanhood as a Black woman on TV, because she told us on Watch What Happens Live, I knew I wasn't just representing for women. I knew I was representing for Black women. Do y'all know how exhausting that is? Do you know how taxing that is? So I want to encourage you all to not only give her grace, but to give yourselves grace, right? And to not feel like you always have to be showing up in a way that is digestible for other people. The other thing that we hear Olandria talk about was how she called her mother and her father before she went on the show, how she considers everyone else and how her actions impact them before she makes decisions, how she was the therapist of the villa, how she was the advice person, how she was wanting people to be included and going to talk with people, and how she didn't want to make the decision she made about Nick, but that she did, and she was finally selfish and did that, right? She talks about how when she finally spoke directly to Taylor, that was a moment of weakness, and all of this is about her showing up in that second area of strength, the self-sacrifice. Sacrifice yourself for the betterment of everyone else around you. She's the eldest daughter, right? She's primed to do this, but this is also situated within her understanding of her womanhood as a Black woman. And I want to highlight two things in that. When she says, when I picked Nick, I was finally selfish. I want to reframe that, right? I want to reframe that as, this is not her being selfish. This is her finally prioritizing self. This is her finally choosing not to abandon herself. This is her finally choosing to say, what's actually good for my well-being, right? Because if you are a Black woman, and maybe a woman too, there are moments that you're going to experience where people expect you to sacrifice yourself for the betterment of everyone else, and it can feel selfish to not. When you are good, everybody else is good. Okay? The other thing that I want to highlight is when she names that moment with Taylor as weakness. I want to reframe that as well. This was a moment where she finally said, enough is enough, and I am stepping into my power. Okay. A lot of people perceive silence as emotional maturity, but the ability to not only feel your feelings, but to articulate them clearly is emotional maturity. That actually is the goal. That is not weakness. That is strength. To be clear, I am not identifying anything wrong with the way that she showed up in the villa. Her Black womanhood, my Black womanhood, is necessitated by the system that we live under in order to be safe. But what I do want to do is complicate it, add some nuance, add some complexity to it, so that we can begin to push back on the parts that don't actually serve us. I will end on this note. Olandria is very clear that she is that girl, and I love that for her. What I hope happens in the months and the years to come is that she really gets an opportunity to sit with, who do I actually want that girl to be, though? Those are my thoughts.